Hi, and do not mess this up, because command abilities define the outcome of each Age of Sigmar game, but only if you know how to use them. For the rest of this video, I will refer to command points as CP. Take Rally, a simple recovery ability to keep our units alive. Or is it? When we look at our limited resources, like the 4 command points we get each battle round, we often misunderstand their purpose. When you think about using a command ability, ask yourself this question: would that command interrupt the enemy plan, or at least make them use more of their resources? Back to Rally. Let's say we got a 5 health hero and our opponent just casts a d3 damage spell that dealt 3 damage to our hero. Easy choice. Use Rally so our hero is safe. But there are several issues with that, from low to high impact. First, Rally can fail. Rolling bad on Rally often completely negates it. If we just risk it, our opponent might fail to kill the unit anyway. Like in our case, they might only deal 1 damage. But now the biggest issue. We spent a CP to make our opponent to just shift attention. We did not prevent their action. If you really need that hero, evaluation shifts, but often risking a unit to be killed and saving the CP for more damage or mobility is the more effective play. Use Rally to gain reach, bringing back a model in front of a unit to lower their charge range. Put more models on an objective to deny enemy scoring. Close a gap of our screens. Speaking of clutch situations, when do we use the all-out commands? They too seem simple, and their effect is, but they are the most overused ones, because they need a bit of mathematics to be used effectively. But there is a shortcut, and even a trick to skip the calculations entirely. First, what you should not do. You should neither pull out your calculator, nor should you crack your head open to try to get the exact numbers. Instead, memorize a few specific stat lines and their damage output. A common profile is either hitting on 3s and wounding on 4s, or hitting on 4s and wounding on 3s, which is exactly the same before using all-out attack, and means a third of our attacks would wound on average. That profile shifts into one of the next most common profiles when we use all-out attack, because attack profiles are always multipliers, and if you multiply something, you can just shift both factors. If a unit hits on 3s and wounds on 3s, or hits on 4s and wounds on 2s, what you should do? Just halve the maximum damage and then reduce it by 10%. Let's have a unit of Ogre Gluttons, as an example. They have a total of 50 damage, 6 models with 8 damage and a bonus attack from the champion. Now we halve the damage, which is 25, and reduce it by 10%, which is 2.5, and always round down. So we end up at 22 damage. And what does the calculator say about the exact number? About 21. So we're only off by 1 damage out of 50. We did nothing complicated, and I can totally live with that error. And what if that unit hits and wounds on 3s? So we do the exact same thing and end up at 22 damage again. And the calculator says 22. Now, if you want to add in all-out attack, just compare the 2 hit characteristics. If a unit hits on 4s, you get a third more damage out of them. If your unit hits on 3s, you get 25% or 1/4. But you don't even have to calculate the additional damage. Just know, if their base damage is enough to wipe the enemy, and you need that enemy to be wiped, only then use all-out attack to be sure. Or if killing that unit means you win the game. But the real question is when not to use it. And the answer is pretty simple. Do not use it if you can only manage to wipe the enemy when you roll better than the average with the all-out attack. Then skip it. Of course, we need to know how much damage we can actually deal by comparing it to the enemy saves, which is, of course, a multiplication again. Here's the trick. Here's always a trick if it comes down to any kind of calculations on the tabletop. Do not be precise. Just do a rough calculation and always round down to your disadvantage, because that way you can be sure that if you use all-out attack, what you actually planned for will succeed. If you're too generous to begin with, you're actually playing mind games on yourself. And now, as promised, a certain way to skip all the calculations on all-out attack and all-out defense. Never use all-out attack. Yes, never. Unless you win the game if you wipe that unit. Or your units went from a 4+ to hit to a 5+. Else, never. All-out defense. That one is a bit more nuanced. But there is a really easy rule to use it. use it only when your opponent does not use all-out attack. Why? Because that's the most likely situation in which your unit will survive, and only if that unit surviving prevents you from losing the game. And remember the rules. The player has to declare all-out attack when they choose to fight, so you can react to that. In fact, all-out attack and all-out defense are by far the weakest commands. So let's jump to one of the strongest. Power through. Yes, that one is one of the by far strongest. Its effect is, again, really simple on paper. The most common use is to charge with a unit, deal a lot of damage, and then fall back into safety. Of course, after you got attacked. It's stronger if you use it to actually gain mobility, like charging a unit, doing whatever, and then powering through to an objective or to another position to complete a battle tactic. The trick with this one is to know you can always use it if you end up in combat with two enemies. One enemy you want to attack, and one enemy that is like cheap chaff and deals little damage. We charge a unit and pile into another, just slightly to reduce further damage. Then we activate the unit to fight and attack the intended target. This way we can always ensure that we're allowed to use power through if needed, because we end up in combat with at least one unit. Let's go back to our unit of Gluttons. All-out attack would only increase their damage by about 6 damage at rend 1. Against a 3-up save, that's only 3 damage points being actually dealt. Against a 4-up save, that's still only 4 damage, and that's a unit which hits on 4s. We get even less out of all-out attack for units that hit on 3s. But the power-through mobility should never be underestimated. Something you should always consider in list building is that cheap cavalry can easily charge enemy chaff, have a trash tier fight, then power through further into objectives or to complete battle tactics. But let's have a break. Like, subscribe, and let our mind relax by looking at the most simple command ability, covering fire. No trick to it, and only one simple way to play around it. You have a strong shooting unit and a valuable enemy target in range, shoot them. Unsure about damage? Go back to the simple damage calculation. But how do we play around it if you are forced to move into the range of enemy shooting? Move one of your fast chaff units closer to the enemy than your value unit. Now they are forced to spend their command points to shoot your sacrificial unit instead, which most of the time they won't do. What do you mean your army has no cheap sacrificial units? You just haven't decided which one is allowed to die yet. And because how easily our opponent can outplay covering fire, we should not rely on it. To continue, we will look at an on-board situation. We just lost the priority role, or rather the role who starts deploying, and our opponent finished first and forced us to start the round. This is the moment we take a step back and plan our commands. The entire army is screened perfectly. The noblers leave no gaps. But we need to do something that pressures them without putting us in a bad position. What I like to do is take a few minutes and map out my plan. Literally say out loud what I want to do. Yes, out loud, so my opponent hears it. This serves multiple purposes. First, always play with intent. What you say counts, not what you miss. I want to move this unit 5 inches forward for an 8-inch charge. If I roll that 8, 14 of my models get to fight. Your opponent checks it. Now you can move the unit without pressure. Even if the move is not perfect, your opponent knows your intent. They already approved it and can help you execute it correctly. Yes, your opponent can help you, and you should do the same for them. But the more important reason here is command point planning. This way, I can plan how many I need in the enemy turn, and whether I can afford to spend any on all-out commands, because those always have the lowest priority. In this case, I plan to hold the middle with 2 units for my battle tactic. This is usually a bad plan unless you prepared a contingency, which I already did during deployment. We have our priest chant a defensive prayer on the unit we intend to move into the middle. Our second unit is very cheap, so we know we want to use mystical intervention in their turn, and properly all-out defense as well. But we also want to charge on the other flank and use power through to move into a safer position. That means we might need forward to victory, which would leave us with no command points for redeploy, if we need it. It is important to understand when taking that risk is correct. In this case, we are at a disadvantage because of the potential double turn from a high damage opponent. That is why we increase the pressure. Removing their noblers has high priority because it makes them vulnerable and forces their stronger units to trade. Yes, both sides will lose more units this way, but it protects us from the double turn. because the board becomes more spread out. The unit of 6 Blood Crushers looks like it is expensive, but it is only a 260 point unit. Of course, trading it for a 130 point Nobler unit would still be bad, but that's not what we're doing. Blood Crushers come with 30 health on a 4-up, 6-up defensive profile. We charge a unit of Noblers, removing them and pile into another. And by positioning the unit of 6 Blood Crushers with power through, we did not save the unit. We forced the opponent to react. The enemy army now has to shift attention and direction. Our unit is far too close to ignore, and at the same time it is in a position that is hard to reach cleanly, so they cannot just remove it without committing in a way they did not plan. I admit, the play in the middle is a bit riskier. It relies on a 2+ on a d6 to succeed, but the reward is immense. No melee unit can properly fight ours if we get the buff. And here's another layer of planning. We roll for our prayer point stacking in our hero phase. If we roll hot, we commit to the riskier plan. If not, we pivot. We take our cheap chaff and plug the middle instead. That way, we save 2 command points, and we still have redeploy or countercharge available. This way, we know how many command points we are going to use and when, and we get to hear our own plan before we execute it, which is always good for catching mistakes. I do the same with my video scripts. When each minute on screen takes over an hour to edit, planning it properly just makes sense. If you're worried about that your opponent will get annoyed by that, they will not. In fact, the entire game becomes more fluid. Take 2 to 5 minutes before each round. Both players think, talk, and plan. The game becomes smoother, fewer misunderstandings, no gotchas. Speaking of gotchas, let's talk about the built-in gotcha rule of Age of Sigmar. You have heard it, you have seen it, and yet it is the most common "I forgot that was possible" moment. Mystical Intervention. The variation in strength for this command is extreme. If your army has no bonuses to cast and relies on raw 2d6 rolls, it is bottom tier and often ignorable. But if your first name is Disciples of and your last name is Zinch, then this becomes top tier power. And if you have priests and stacked prayer points, the power level goes off the scale. The rule to use it correctly is simple. Unless you have enough prayer points that a 3+ roll, even with the -1, gives you the needed value, do not use it. Only use it if you have enough prayer points to ensure that a roll of a 3+ at the -1 gives you the needed value. I usually use it if I can get the base version on a 2+ and a stronger version on a 3+. Using Mystical Intervention with spellcasting. Do not gamble unless you have to. 2d6 -1 means your opponent only has to be as lucky or unlucky as you are. That flips the probability against you. Unless you are reliably controlling it, like with Kairos or similar effects, do not trust it. Do not rely on this command too heavily. Use it for damage or blocking, not for buffs or debuffs that may or may not matter. For example, take the mortal damage kickback effect I used earlier in the example. If my unit gets charged, I deal damage for sure. If it does not, my unit is safe anyway. The roll is already a gamble. Do not let your strategy become one as well. Who gets the crown as King of Commands? It's a close call, but Forward to Victory is a close second. The ability itself doesn't need much of any explaining, but one simple rule to use it. Always start with the most meaningful charge. There is no reason to slowball it. We determine which charge is the most important, the second most important, and so on. This way, we can just use Forward to Victory when we have to. When calculating and planning any strategy that involves a charge, plan 1 CP for this command. If you end up not using it, awesome. You got 1 CP for power through or the all-outs. And at a double is just too situational to generalize its usage. But now, the King of Commands. Not the King of Age of Sigmar, that's still damage. But the King of Commands, Redeploy. This ability is so powerful, it even shifted list building. Beyond foiling charges, moving onto objectives, and blocking paths, Redeploy has many more use cases. I try to always build 2 versions of each list, one at 2000 points, then I adjust it down to 1950. And if I cannot clearly explain why the 1950 list is worse, I keep it. The reason is Redeploy, but not because I use it defensively to move away from danger. I use it most of the time to move closer. My opponent moves their threats, and my valuable units are safely outside their damage range, so I redeploy closer to their next target. What if I only roll a 1? Then it's just +1 to charge. That's not worth 50 points, but it's also the worst possible outcome. and sometimes that is already enough. The extra command point in Battle Round 1. The faster your list can create pressure, the more valuable that 5th command point becomes. And honestly, every list should create pressure as early as deployment. Watch this video over there for the #1 strategy in Age of Sigmar. Sigmar out.